Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Last week, I had one of the most annoying bus rides of my life. It was brutally hot and sticky outside. The kind of heat that makes your clothes feel glued to your skin. I was coming home from work, totally drained, and thanks to the train delays, I had no choice but to take the bus. It showed up late, of course, and when it finally came, it was semi-crowded, some seats taken, some standing, but nothing too packed. I climbed on and made my way to the middle section. There was enough space for people to stand comfortably without getting in each other's way. I found a spot near one of the poles and held the overhead rail. I made sure to stand in a way that left a little bubble around me. I wasn't trying to be antisocial or anything, but with how sweaty everything felt, I just needed some personal space. A couple of minutes later, a woman got on. She walked in, scanned the area with her eyes, and then came and stood right next to me. And I mean right up against me. Her shoulders started brushing mine almost immediately, and I could feel the heat from her arm press into mine like we were close friends or something. There was plenty of space around, so there was no reason for her to stand that close. At first, I assumed maybe she was unsteady or needed a moment to adjust, but then she started leaning on me. Not gently, not just by accident. It was intentional. She was using me like I was a wall. I could feel her weight shifting onto my shoulder more and more. I was stunned. Trying to stay polite, I turned toward her a bit and quietly explained that I was uncomfortable and would appreciate it if she could move just a little. I kept my tone soft because I really didn't want to start anything. She looked at me for a moment like she wasn't expecting to be asked that. Then, without saying anything, she pulled herself upright and took half a step away. I figured that was the end of it. For about 5 minutes, it was. Then it started again, slowly. At first, it was just the outer part of her arm touching mine. Then her shoulder began tilting, gently at first, and before I knew it, she was full on leaning into me again, like I was a comfy armrest. At that point, I was getting really irritated. I had already spoken to her once. I had been nice. I had been calm. And she still decided to ignore that and go back to making me her human support system. What annoyed me the most was that she chose to do this. Despite there being space all around, she could have moved 2 feet in any direction and had more room. She didn't need to press into me. I kept my mouth shut this time, but my frustration kept building. The heat was making everything feel worse. My shirt was already sticking to me, and now I had the added bonus of someone else's sweaty arm pressing against mine like it was her right. So I stood there, letting her get comfortable again, thinking about what to do. I didn't want to start a public argument, but I also didn't want to keep being treated like furniture. That's when the idea hit me. If she wanted to lean on me without permission, maybe she needed a reminder that humans aren't furniture, and definitely not stable like a wall. I waited until she was fully relaxed and leaning her weight into me again. I gave it a few more seconds, just enough time for her to really settle in. Then, without any warning at all, I took a single step forward. She had no idea it was coming. 1 second she was steady, the next she lost her balance completely. I didn't say a word. I just moved, and she immediately tipped to the side and dropped to the floor. She landed on one knee and caught herself with her hands, and her purse hit the floor beside her. There was a pause. A few people looked over, but no one said anything. I kept looking ahead, acting like nothing happened. The woman slowly stood back up. She looked at me, but not with anger or shock, just quiet disbelief. Then she adjusted her bag and walked away from me without a word. She moved to the opposite side of the bus and stood by herself for the rest of the ride. I noticed she kept her distance from everyone after that. She didn't lean on anyone, didn't touch anyone, just stared forward and held the rail like she should have done from the start. The rest of the ride was exactly how I wanted it. Quiet, cool, well, less sweaty at least, and completely free of strangers using my body as furniture. There was no yelling, no confrontation, just a small dose of petty revenge that did exactly what it needed to do. And in case anyone wonders, yes, I'm a girl. And no, she didn't look like she had any health problems at all. She wasn't limping, wasn't using a cane, didn't show any sign of discomfort standing normally. She looked just fine. I wouldn't have done anything like that if I thought she actually needed help or support. She didn't even try to steal anything. I had my bag on the other shoulder, away from her, and I always keep it zipped and in front of me when I ride public transport. I've worked in a big city long enough to know how to protect my stuff. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't someone in need. This was just a rude woman who thought she could do whatever she wanted and picked the wrong sweaty stranger to lean on that day. I work in custodial at a large resort. My days are filled with cleaning messes that most people can't even imagine. Vomit in hallway corners, toilets clogged with things they shouldn't be, and sometimes worse. I take care of the guest bathrooms, employee restrooms, locker rooms, even the bar staff's private facilities. I scrub and sanitize while others walk by pretending I'm invisible. But without people like me, this whole place would collapse. My shift usually starts early in the morning and ends by mid-afternoon. I'm one of those people you see pushing carts with cleaning supplies, trying to stay out of everyone's way while still making everything shine. On some of the more brutal days, I like to treat myself to a drink after work. There's a quick service bar near the pool, nothing fancy, just a counter where you can grab a drink to go in a plastic cup. One day after a particularly rough shift, I had to deal with 3 separate bathroom incidents in one morning. I stopped by the bar. I was still in uniform, sweaty and tired, just wanting something cold to help me wind down. I ordered one of those pre-made espresso martinis they keep behind the bar. It comes from a bottle, and all the bartender has to do is pour it over ice and maybe add a splash of oat milk. She barely made eye contact as she poured the drink. After she set it down in front of me, she looked at the receipt I signed. Then she looked at me again, this time with a curious expression, like she was trying to figure out who I was. She asked what department I worked in. I told her I worked in cleaning. Her face shifted a bit after that. There was a slight smirk as she nodded and mentioned that tipping was very important. She said it goes around. She delivered the comment in a tone that felt more like judgment than advice. I didn't say anything else, just picked up my drink and left. I couldn't believe the way she said it. It wasn't friendly or helpful. It was like she was calling me out for not tipping. I wasn't rude, I just didn't leave a tip for a bottled drink that took her 5 seconds to pour. I don't usually tip for counter service, especially when the prices are already high. And to be honest, it annoyed me that someone would throw guilt at me over a tip when I spend my days scrubbing toilets for no tips at all. Still, I decided to go back later. I wasn't angry, just a bit irritated and maybe feeling petty. I wanted to make a point. About an hour later, I returned to the same bar. The bartender gave me a surprised look as I stepped up again. I ordered the same drink. She didn't say much this time, just repeated the same lazy motion, bottle to cup, splash of oat milk, slide it across the counter. When the receipt came, I wrote in a tip, 10 cents. I didn't do it to be cruel. I just wanted to show that tipping wasn't something I was going to be shamed into. If I tipped, it would be my choice, not something I was guilted into doing. She noticed the tip. I saw her eyes pause on the receipt for a moment before she quickly moved on. She didn't say anything that time, just walked away and left me standing there. From that day forward, things changed. She started avoiding me. If I came by, she found reasons to step away or have someone else take my order. There was no more fake friendliness, no smiles, just silence and cold shoulders. I didn't mind, if anything I preferred it. It didn't stop there. Apparently she also started talking about me to the other bar staff. One of the newer guys mentioned to me in passing that she referred to me as the stingy janitor behind my back. I laughed when I heard that, because while she was complaining about a 10-cent tip, I was still cleaning the worst messes in the resort without expecting a single extra penny from anyone. Then, about 2 weeks later, something happened that still makes me smile when I think about it. One of the higher-up managers, someone important, had an accident in the bar staff restroom. There was a busted pipe and the toilet backed up. Water everywhere. It smelled awful, and there was a real risk of the mess spreading to other parts of the building. Karen, the bartender, found it first. She ran out of the restroom looking horrified. and immediately told her manager she wasn't dealing with it. She said it was too disgusting and not her job to clean anything like that. So guess who got the call? That's right, me. I showed up with my gloves, bleach, mop, and everything else I needed. I walked right past her. She was sitting on a bench outside the restroom, covering her nose with her shirt and looking like she might cry. She stared at me as I walked in. I gave her a nod but didn't say a word. Inside, it was bad. The toilet had overflowed onto the floor and someone had tried to flush what looked like half a roll of paper towels. It smelled like a sewer, and the water had already started to seep into the hallway. I got to work and spent the next hour cleaning it up. When I came out, Karen was still sitting on the bench. Her eyes looked tired, and she didn't say anything as I walked by. I looked at her and simply told her she was welcome. She mumbled something under her breath, but I didn't catch it, and I didn't really care. Since then, the air between us has stayed cold but quiet. No more lectures, no more fake smiles, just silence. And honestly, that suits me just fine. People like her think they're at the center of the resort because they serve drinks to guests. But the truth is, the resort runs on people like me, the ones who scrub the floors, clean up after the messes no one wants to talk about, and keep everything functioning behind the scenes. I might not get a tip jar, I might not get thanked, but I know what I'm worth. And if she ever forgets again, I'll be the one they call when her precious restroom turns into a biohazard. I live in a quiet neighborhood where most people keep to themselves but are generally friendly. I have a 12-year-old son, a kind and respectful boy. He's not the type to start trouble. He plays soccer, loves his video games, and mostly minds his own business. We'd lived peacefully in the area for 6 years until a new family moved in. A woman, who I now refer to as Karen, came to the house on the corner with her son, who was around 10. From the first week, she acted like she owned the place. She complained about kids making noise, dogs barking, and even had the nerve to tell people how to park their cars in front of their own homes. Her kid was worse. He had a chip on his shoulder and walked around like he was tougher than everyone else. He bossed kids around at the park and made up stories about being bullied anytime someone didn't give him what he wanted. My son and the other kids mostly just avoided him. Then one day, things got serious. My son came home from school looking upset. He clutched his hand and looked like he was holding back tears. I asked him what had happened, and he told me, his voice shaky, that the boy from the corner house had shocked him with something. He described how the boy had walked up to him at the bus stop, smirked, and pulled out a stun gun. He said the boy had told him it would be funny to see if he flinched, and then pressed the device to his hand without warning. I was in disbelief at first, but when I looked at his palm, I saw a red mark. It wasn't huge, but it was definitely real. My son said he had pushed the kid away and told him he was messed up. But the boy just laughed and said his mom said he could use it on bullies. I didn't waste a second. I walked straight to that corner house and rang the bell. Karen opened the door with a smug look, clearly already in a bad mood. When I asked her if her son had a stun gun and had used it on my kid, she rolled her eyes and confirmed she gave it to him. She claimed it was for self-defense because, according to her, kids in this neighborhood were wild and aggressive. When I told her what had actually happened, she brushed it off and accused my son of being the problem. She seemed completely unbothered by the fact that her child had used a weapon on another kid. When I told her I would call the police, her smirk dropped. She tried to act shocked and called me ridiculous for taking it so seriously. But I was done wasting time. I told her the law would handle it. Back at home, I took pictures of my son's injury and recorded everything he said about what happened. Then I called the non-emergency police line. They actually took it seriously. A couple of officers came to our house later that evening and listened carefully as my son repeated what happened. They examined the mark on his hand and asked for any other details. Then they headed over to Karen's house. Later, I heard from neighbors who watched the scene unfold. Apparently, when the officers questioned her, she tried to play the role of the innocent, worried mom. She told them that her son had been bullied and she had only given him the stun gun so he could protect himself. She claimed he would never use it unless he had no choice. But when they spoke to her son, he was proud of what he'd done. He bragged about using the stun gun to teach bigger kids a lesson and said he was just doing what his mom told him to. That was all the officers needed. One of them told her she was being charged with multiple things: giving a child a prohibited weapon, allowing him to use it without supervision, and endangering others. Karen shouted that she was a single mom and was only protecting her son. She kept arguing, but the officer stayed firm and eventually read her rights while handcuffing her on the front lawn. The whole street noticed. One woman even recorded it from her porch. Karen yelled and cried, but it didn't help. They took her away, and another officer stayed behind to wait with her son until social services arrived. Over the next few days, I started hearing stories from other parents. Several said their kids had been threatened or scared by Karen's son before, but didn't speak up because they thought no one would believe them. One kid had been told that if he didn't give up the swing at the park, he'd get zapped next. Everyone thought the kid was bluffing, but now it made sense. Turns out the stun gun wasn't legal for public use in our county, especially not for minors. Karen had bought it online through some shady website and handed it to her son like it was a toy. Eventually, Karen faced serious charges: illegal possession of a weapon, child endangerment, and assault by proxy. Social services placed her son in temporary care while they investigated the situation. I actually felt bad for the boy. He was clearly copying what he learned at home. He thought he was doing what he was supposed to, but that didn't excuse what he did to my kid, or the others. A couple weeks after it all happened, while I was picking up my son from soccer practice, one of the other dads came over and thanked me. He said what I did helped protect all the kids in the neighborhood. I nodded and said I just did what any parent would have done. Since then, things have been a lot quieter around here. No more screaming from the corner house. No more drama at the park. The kids feel safe again. My son still talks about it sometimes. Not because he's scared, but because it made him feel proud that he stood up for himself and that his dad stood up for him too. Now when people talk about the incident, they call it that stun gun thing, or Karen's meltdown. It's kind of become a local legend. But for me, it's just a reminder that being loud and entitled doesn't mean you're right, and that no kid should ever have to worry about being attacked just for waiting at a bus stop. I'm a 33-year-old woman and I have two German Shepherds, Jameson and Guinness. They're not just pets to me, they're my family, my companions, and honestly the best part of my day. I bought this house with them in mind. Big yard, lots of space inside, quiet neighborhood. Everything was chosen because it would be a good fit for the dogs. Every 4th of July I throw a party. Nothing over the top, just friends, food, fireworks, and music. I usually get about 20 people. Everyone who knows me understands that Jameson and Guinness are part of the package deal. They roam around, greet everyone, and enjoy the company. This year, one of my friends brought her husband. They'd gotten married fairly recently, and I had only met him once before, at a group dinner. He hadn't said much then, just gave me a stiff smile, said a few polite things, and kept to himself. Even back then I could tell he wasn't exactly friendly. My friend herself has always been weird about dogs. She doesn't hate them, but she never really warmed up to mine either. She pet them if they were in her way or barked for attention, but it always felt forced. I just accepted that some people aren't dog people. When they arrived at the party, both Jameson and Guinness immediately trotted over to say hi. It's what they do, tails wagging, eyes bright, ready to charm whoever walked through the door. Like always, they tried to greet the newcomers, but my friend and her husband ignored them completely. Not a glance, not a pet, nothing. They walked past the dogs like they weren't even there. I noticed that and it bugged me. Not just because they didn't acknowledge the dogs, but because literally everyone else had. Every other guest who arrived had knelt down, rubbed a belly, scratched an ear, or at least said something kind to them. My friend and her husband sat down on the couch, acting like they were above it all. A few minutes later, I saw Guinness walk over to them. He was being his usual gentle self. He rested his head on the guy's knee and looked up with hopeful eyes. I watched the man lean over and say something quietly to my friend, and she responded with an annoyed look. Then the man looked directly at me and said something that immediately set the tone for the rest of the night. He asked if I could put the dogs away in another room. He said they didn't want the dogs around them and didn't want to be bothered during the party. At first, I was stunned. I honestly thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He looked completely serious, like this was a reasonable request. I told him no. I said that this was Jameson and Guinness's house and they live here. They don't get locked up because someone doesn't want to be near them. I added that if he just gave them a quick pat on the head or said hi, they'd leave him alone. That usually worked, but he didn't look satisfied. He looked even more annoyed. My friend then joined in and said it wouldn't hurt to just put the dogs away for a few hours. She said it was a simple request, that I was being rude by not making my guests comfortable. I responded that this wasn't a dog-free event and that the dogs being around was something everyone already knew. If they weren't comfortable with that, they could always leave. I wasn't going to change how things worked in my own home because two people didn't like animals. That's when her husband stood up and said in a sharp tone that they were leaving. I didn't stop them. I said something about how they don't get to make the rules in my house. My friend gave me a dramatic roll of her eyes as she followed him out. After they left, I noticed the tension in the room dropped. A few people looked around, not really sure how to react. I just smiled and went back to grilling. A few guests came up and said I handled it well. Others kept quiet. Later that night, a couple of friends said maybe I could have just put the dogs in another room to avoid conflict. But more people said I did the right thing. Jameson and Guinness lived here, and I had every right to let them enjoy the party too. The next morning, I got a long message from my friend. She wrote that her husband felt disrespected and insulted by the way I treated them. She said I had no manners as a host and that asking to have the dogs put away was a normal, polite request. She said I needed to apologize or they wouldn't be attending any more events I hosted. I didn't reply. I read the message and just left it there. A couple of days passed, and another friend told me they were complaining about me in a group chat I wasn't part of. Apparently, they were saying I was obsessed with my dogs, overly emotional, and didn't know how to make guests feel welcome. That annoyed me more than anything else. So I decided to post something. I uploaded a group photo from the party. Jameson and Guinness were in the frame. Jameson with a red bandana and Guinness lying across someone's feet. Everyone in the picture was smiling. I captioned it with something simple about how grateful I was for friends who loved my dogs as much as I did. Within an hour, my friend messaged me again. She asked if the post was about them. I told her it didn't have their name on it, so if she felt guilty, that was on her. She said I was being petty and immature. I told her no, I was just standing by my boundaries. She tried to argue again that they were only asking for a small thing and that I was being dramatic by taking it so personally. I told her we clearly didn't see things the same way, and maybe we weren't as close as we used to be. She didn't respond after that. A few weeks later, I got invited to another friend's birthday dinner. I almost didn't go, but I decided to show up and be civil. Sure enough, my friend and her husband were there. I kept things polite. I said hello, smiled, and took a seat far away from them. The night went mostly fine until her husband decided to make a little dig. He said something about how I must be running a full-time dog hotel now, with a sarcastic tone and a fake smile. I didn't let it go. I told him that the dog hotel was fully booked with guests who had better social skills than he did. That shut him up real fast. There was an awkward silence for a moment before someone at the table chuckled. Another person tried to hide a laugh. The man looked angry, but his wife grabbed his arm and told him quietly that it was time to leave. They walked out without saying goodbye. After they left, the host of the dinner came over and quietly apologized. They hadn't expected that kind of drama. I said it was fine and that I wasn't surprised anymore. Since then, those two have pretty much disappeared from all group events. People started realizing how exhausting they were to be around. They were always demanding, always had a complaint, always acted like they were doing everyone a favor just by showing up. As for me, I'm still hosting my parties. Jameson and Guinness are still greeting everyone at the door, wearing their silly bandanas and wagging their tails. They're happy. I'm happy. And the people who matter don't mind sharing space with two big fluffy goofballs. Anyone who does, well, they know where the door is. I'm 23 weeks pregnant now, and this happened a few weeks ago when I was around 18 weeks along. Like most first-time moms, I've been doing a lot of reading, so I knew the glucose screening test was coming. At my appointment, my doctor gave me a bottle of that gross, sugary orange drink and said I had to take the 1-hour glucose test. I did, and a day later they called me and said my numbers were a little high. That meant I had to take the more in-depth 3-hour test at a specialized lab. The 3-hour test is a bit of a commitment. You have to fast overnight, then show up early in the morning. When you arrive, they draw your blood for a baseline reading. Then you drink a special, super sugary beverage, taste like some carbonated syrup, and then remove the bubbles. After that, you get your blood drawn again every hour for 3 hours. So that's 4 total blood draws. Some people wait inside the building the whole time, but I didn't feel great and the chairs weren't comfortable, so I asked if I could wait in my car. The staff said that was totally fine, as long as I came in at the right times. So I did exactly that. I arrived, checked in on the little tablet they had at the back of the room, drank the sugar sludge, and did my first blood draw. Then I went out to my car, reclined the seat, and waited for the next draw. I came back inside when it was time, went straight to the front, and had my second draw done. Then I repeated it again for the third time. By the time I came back for the fourth and final draw, it was almost noon, and the waiting room was the busiest I'd seen it. The room was completely packed with people, all quietly waiting. I headed straight for the front desk since the staff had told me earlier that I didn't need to check in again. I had already done that at the start of the day. While I was standing in line, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I turned and saw an older woman sitting close by. She had that expression older women sometimes get when they think they're about to be helpful, like they're doing you a favor. She pointed toward the check-in tablet and told me, in a very polite tone, that I needed to sign in there. I smiled and thanked her, then told her that I had already checked in earlier and this wasn't my first visit today. I explained that I was here for another round of blood work. That clearly confused her, and she asked me if they were seriously making me come back again and again. I told her yes, this was my 4th time in today, but at least it was the last one. Her confusion only grew, and she asked why on earth I needed to come in so many times in one day. So, trying to be helpful, I explained that I was doing a glucose test that required blood draws at regular intervals, one every hour for 3 hours, plus the first one when I arrived. She had never heard of that kind of test before, so she asked what it was even for. I told her it was to test for gestational diabetes because I was pregnant. As soon as the word pregnant left my mouth, her entire face changed. It was like watching someone get hit with a surprise gust of wind. Her skin flushed red instantly, and her mouth hung open slightly like she didn't know what to say. Then she quickly looked away, clearly uncomfortable. I hadn't said it in a dramatic way or anything, I was just answering her question. The room got weirdly quiet. Not silent, but the background noise dropped noticeably. You could feel the awkward tension, like people were suddenly more aware of the conversation that had just happened. Some of the other patients shifted in their seats. I caught a glance from someone across the room who gave me a look of sympathy before turning away. The woman who had questioned me didn't say another word. She kept her eyes pointed firmly toward the wall and didn't look back at me again. Thankfully, I didn't have to stand in line much longer. One of the lab staff recognized me and called me in before I even reached the counter. They were super nice and efficient the whole day. I followed the technician back into the lab, sat down, and had my final blood draw. She gave me a small cup of water and told me I was free to go. As we wrapped up, I mentioned the awkward interaction in the waiting room. The tech laughed softly and told me that the same woman had been making passive-aggressive comments all morning. Apparently, she'd been muttering about the long wait, how young people kept skipping ahead, and how everything used to be run better. Classic energy. When I stepped back into the waiting room to leave, I walked past her again. She still wouldn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, clutching her purse like it was a shield. Her face was still a little flushed. I half expected her to say something, maybe a passive comment, maybe an apology, but she said nothing. I left feeling both annoyed and a little amused. I mean, if you're going to poke your nose into a stranger's business, be ready to hear an honest answer. And if that answer makes you uncomfortable, maybe just don't ask next time. I'm not ashamed of being pregnant, and I'm not about to whisper it like it's a secret. That whole experience stuck with me. It wasn't the worst thing that's ever happened, but it was one of those little reminders that some people just cannot handle reality when it doesn't fit their expectations. She asked what I was doing. I answered. That's all. Both of my parents are teachers, and growing up, that meant I was always the teacher's kid to someone, somewhere. My mom taught English and my dad taught science, and they had been in the profession for so long that I couldn't go anywhere with them without running into former students. It happened constantly, whether we were grocery shopping, walking through a mall, or sitting in a cafe, someone would spot one of them and come running over with a smile on their face. It used to amuse me how they lit up when they recognized my parents. Some of them hugged them, some shook their hands, and some just stood there awkwardly before blurting out how much they'd loved their class. I'd often hear them thank my mom for helping them love reading, or my dad for making science fun. Some even teared up a little. It wasn't just polite small talk, they meant it. Even people my age would act surprised when they found out who my parents were. They'd suddenly look at me like I told them I was royalty. They'd shake their heads and say things like they couldn't believe I was really their kid, and how my dad or mom had been their absolute favorite teacher. It was weird, but I always appreciated how loved my parents were. One year on my dad's birthday, he walked into his classroom to find the blackboard completely covered in drawings. There were doodles of birthday presents, party hats, hearts, and a huge "Happy Birthday, Mr. Dad" written across the middle in big block letters, obviously not using his real name here. That day got me thinking. It had always been good stories with them, happy encounters, fond memories, jokes about silly students, and even students who kept in touch after graduation. But I was curious. Surely they must have had some bad apples. I wasn't asking about the kids who didn't do their homework. I meant the real troublemakers, the bullies, the loudmouths, the ones who made their job harder. Later that night, I asked him. My dad took a moment before answering. He looked thoughtful. Eventually, he said he couldn't really think of anyone specific. He explained that sure, there were students who struggled, but most of the ones he worried about were the ones who took a wrong path later in life. He said it saddened him to see some of them fall into petty crime or drugs. He mentioned that some of those kids had so much potential too, and it was a shame. I turned to my mom, expecting something similar, but her face changed immediately. Her tone was calm, but she said there was one student she'd never forgotten. She had been just a few weeks into her teaching internship when it happened. One of her students had gotten caught stealing. It turned into something worse. The student had pulled out a knife and ended up killing the person he was stealing from. She said it hit her so hard at the time that she remembered the student's full name even after all those years. She told me she had looked him up online out of curiosity once and found an article about the case. That moment stuck with her for over 3 decades. That story shook me. It made me realize just how many people my parents had interacted with over the years. Hundreds, maybe thousands. And not all of them were harmless. Some of them might have been dangerous. Maybe they still were. A few weeks after that conversation, I experienced one of those rare bad encounters firsthand. I was out with my parents running errands. We had just stepped into a bookstore when a loud, overly excited voice cut through the quiet. A woman in her 40s spotted my dad and rushed over like she'd seen a celebrity. She greeted him with a dramatic flair, tossing her arms around him and laughing loudly. She acted like they were old friends, although it was clear from the look on my dad's face that he had no idea who she was. He stayed polite though. He always did. She started reminding him of her time in his class. She described how she used to wear a pink hoodie and sit in the front row. She said she used to make excuses to leave class early and bragged about how she'd tricked him by faking stomach cramps. She laughed like it was the most hilarious thing in the world. My dad gave a tired smile but didn't say much. I could tell he didn't appreciate the memory, but he didn't want to be rude either. The woman turned to me and commented about how weird it must be having a teacher for a dad. She joked about how he probably bored me with science facts at home, then laughed again at her own joke. Then she brought up a story about how she once put a frog in the supply closet as a prank. She said my dad had gotten really angry and sent her to the principal's office, and she laughed again as if that made her clever. My dad responded with a neutral nod and said that, yeah, that sounded like something he'd do. She went on to say that she got suspended for it, but didn't seem sorry at all. She said she had done it because she was bored and that the school had been awful anyway. I stayed quiet, but something about her behavior rubbed me the wrong way. It didn't feel like a nostalgic reunion. It felt like she was trying to show off. That's when her real reason for approaching us came out. She said her son had applied to my dad's school and had been rejected. She rolled her eyes and said the school claimed they had no space. Then she looked at my dad with a smirk and asked if he could help get her son in. She said he must have influence after being there so long. My dad shook his head gently and explained that admissions weren't his responsibility. She didn't like that. Her smile twitched. Her voice grew colder. She said she couldn't believe he wouldn't help. She told him that with all the years he had worked there, surely he could pull a few strings. He calmly repeated that it wasn't up to him and that it wouldn't be fair to other students. She didn't like that answer either. She scoffed and said he clearly hadn't changed. Still a doormat, still playing the hero. She said she used to think he was a cool teacher, but now she saw that he was just another spineless rule follower. She said maybe that's why he was still stuck at a second-rate school. My dad didn't respond. He simply turned away and headed toward the front of the store. I followed. She trailed after us, still muttering to herself. When we reached the parking lot, she caught up and kept ranting. She said he was wasting his life trying to save loser kids, and now he couldn't even do one favor for someone who used to know him. She said the school had gone downhill just like him. That was the final straw for me. I turned to her and told her off, not with yelling, not with insults, but with facts. I said she had treated teachers like tools back when she was a student and was still doing it now. I said her suspension wasn't unfair. It was deserved. I pointed out that maybe, just maybe, the school didn't want her son because they saw the same behavior in him that she was showing now. She didn't say anything right away. Her face twisted, and then she stormed off across the lot, throwing a few angry words over her shoulder. That was the end of that. Back in the car, my dad looked at me and gave a small chuckle. He said, now he remembered her. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.